Hi everyone, welcome back to be Like Christ. We are in the last chapter of the 50s today in Psalm 59, and you can get Psalm 59 PDF outline on our website at tobelikechrist.com. Check out the website. There's new stuff being added every day, and if this is maybe your first time studying with us, there's a bunch of stuff out there, including hundreds of these studies now, so go check those out. Psalm 59. Author, can you guess? It's once again David. David's on a new streak here. As far as New Testament references, I'm not aware of any in the New Testament. Back to Psalm 59. As we take a look at this chapter, you'll notice that it is very, very similar to a lot of David's other psalms in themes and content and in the ideas. So let's talk about our themes. Number one, first theme today, evil men like unsatiable dogs, or like never satisfied dogs, try to devour righteous people. And then number two, God is a fortress of steadfast love for those righteous people. Our definitions, we've got some that we've covered several times, and we've got a new one today, and that's the word derision. I'm sure we've seen this in the Bible before, but I just wanted to define it. I didn't really know exactly how to define it off the top of my head. It appears in verse 8. Derision is to ridicule or to view something as ridiculous. We'll see that God looks at people who live in sin and act like they're never going to be punished for it. He looks at them in derision. And then our next two definitions are, the first one, according to do not destroy. This is in the introduction to the psalm. We've talked about this, and this will be the last chapter that it appears in, at least in this sequence. I think it's been in 56, 57, 58, 59. I think either 3 or 4 of the previous chapters. This is the last time that we're going to see it. As we mentioned, it's hard to say exactly what this phrase refers to. Some people think it's a musical term. Other people have different ideas, but no one knows exactly what it means. And then miktam is another word that we've seen several times, and we'll see it in the next psalm, but again, don't have great precision in terms of the original meaning of this term. For Psalm 59, we once again have a little bit of context information. In 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 11, King Saul, who was always trying to kill David, posted some men outside David's house to capture him and ultimately to kill him. David, though, with the help of his wife, whose name was Michal, M-I-C-H-A-L, I believe, kind of an unusual name for a girl in our modern day, but that was his wife's name, Michal. She helped him escape. David survived, but Saul gave Michal, David's wife, to another man. You read about that in 1 Samuel 25:44. I think that's obviously important to understand this chapter, but also just to understand, I guess, the heart of David. When David talks about his oppression, he had his wife taken from him by his enemies and given to another person. You think you would be angry with your enemies? You think you might write a few psalms about your trouble with all the people who oppress you unjustly, even though it's not your fault? Yeah, probably. And so that's just one example of something that may have stirred up the emotions in David to write some of these psalms that we've now been looking at for several chapters. For Psalm 59, we've got 17 verses. I've got it titled, A Request for Deliverance to the God of Steadfast Love. So as I mentioned, very similar in theme to many of the other psalms that David wrote. It's a prayer to God for deliverance from enemies. David wrote, quote, Deliver me from my enemies, O my God. Protect me from those who rise up against me, in verse 1. Now, in verse 3, David states that this oppression that's come upon him, the fact that King Saul is hunting him down, is not a result of any personal sin of his own. Rather, it was because of the twisted hearts of these evil men who were bent on harming him. And if you know the story of David, David had never done anything wrong to Saul. In fact, he had supported Saul and helped Saul in many ways, and yet Saul still wanted to kill him. So that's kind of the context that's going on here. It's not David's fault. There's just some crazy people. He compares his enemies to bloodthirsty dogs that prowl around, and they're never satisfied with what they've eaten, always looking for something else to consume. They lived as if God had no awareness of their sins, according to verse 7. And David called on the Lord to rouse himself and to punish these men and to save him. He knew that God was, in fact, aware of these people's actions and that God looked down at them in derision. Interestingly, he asked God not to kill his enemies, but to humble them so that they could serve as visible examples to other people, and so other people could observe how God deals with proud men who resist him. On the day of God's deliverance, David said that he would sing praises to God for being a fortress of steadfast love to him. All right, so that is Psalm 59. Let's talk about an application. We don't all have enemies like David had enemies. David was a significant political figure. He led large groups of people, and that role inevitably comes with a lot of enemies, a lot of people who are opposed to you. Now, I know that I don't personally have earthly enemies that are constantly oppressing me to the point of exhaustion. There aren't people hiding out outside of my house waiting to kill me when I get up in the morning, right? I'm not being chased down like David was, or his life is constantly in danger. So how can we really relate to these? I think one way that we can relate to these Psalms and to these prayers is in relation to our spiritual battles, the spiritual threats that come against us, our spiritual enemy, who's Satan, and our spiritual struggle to try to do the right thing. Satan is always bothering us, putting temptations in front of our face, pressuring us to do things, and just generally trying to make our life hard. Now, I don't have the enemies outside my house, but I certainly have felt the exhaustion of constantly resisting temptation and fighting the good fight of faith every day, and I imagine that you probably have as well. And so when we apply these Psalms in a spiritual sense, I think they become much more relatable to the average person, and I think that they are instructive in how we should pray to God about our spiritual struggles. Now, I had an experience this morning where I was talking to a couple that does work in Iraq, and they were talking about a group of Christians there that were very stalwart in their faith, and that they were kind of encamped, within this Muslim community, and they were very bold about their faith, and it's a luxury to be able to say that I don't have enemies outside of my house, because there are people in the world that actually do, right? And that relate to this psalm much more on a physical and a spiritual level. So if you're in a position like me, where you're not under constant threat of your life or your faith, thank God for that. But also understand that we do have battles against temptation. No matter where you are in the world, you have unique temptations to you, and we need to reach out to God for help with those, because fighting them is exhausting, and we have to have God to support us, to be our fortress.